Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Barrows. If you are attending this, you either know me from my work in the past or you are a part of my social media course at UNL or otherwise. And I'm excited to be doing this conversation tonight with Andrew Myers and Brendan Foley on a topic that's very important, which is really being productive, really having the tools to be efficient in the workplace and at our jobs as content producers or as marketers. In a moment, I'm going to bring on Andrew and Brendan and give them a chance to introduce themselves. And I will start with bringing on Andrew. And Andrew, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for taking time to join me tonight. Could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I know some people who watch this may know you, but I know my classes won't. And I'd love for them to get to know you a little bit.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here. As Chris said, my name is Andrew Myers. I live in West Michigan, work for Hope College. We're a private liberal arts college of about 3,000 students in Holland, Michigan, right close to the lake, Lake Michigan, that is. So fun to talk to you tonight. I have been at Hope for 15 years as of this year. Actually studied there, graduated, went into admissions, and quickly got started on admissions marketing. So I manage our overall operations and communication strategy for admissions marketing.
Excellent. Now, I'm also going to bring in Brendan Foley. Welcome, Brendan. I want to thank you for joining us tonight and really take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Andrew. So my name is Brendan Foley. I live outside Raleigh, North Carolina. I am the Director of Communications for the Morehead Cain Foundation. It is an undergraduate merit scholarship program. And in my role, I get to do pretty much a little bit or a lot of bit, depending on the week, of everything. So whether it is recruitment and selections and admissions, to student affairs, communications, to social media strategy, alumni engagement, fundraising, you name it, our foundation does it all as kind of our own separate partner outside of the University of North Carolina structure. And so it gives me a lot of opportunities to play in nonprofit work. Before joining the foundation in 2014, I spent 11 years in broadcast journalism, which was a whole lot of fun. I wouldn't change that for the world, though it is very nice to be in higher ed now and actually get my nights and weekends back.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here. The reason that I have asked both of you here is, and you've both talked about this subject before, but really how to be effective workers, how to be efficient in our jobs, the tools to help us do it, and really what makes our lives easier really is when we're organized, right? Both of you extremely organized in the work that you do. And I would like to talk a little bit at the front here. Maybe if we could start with you, Andrew. When you first got into your profession, how did you stay organized, and what have you learned over the years that maybe you would have done differently at the start, as opposed to maybe what you actually did?
Yeah, it's been, as I think back about it, I don't know if I've thought back to 2005, and the world was a very different place at that time, very different than 2020. Had its own set of issues, I guess. But when I came right out of college into my first professional role, I don't know that I exactly had an idea of how to manage a professional workday. I think everybody going into a new role, you're trying to figure that out. I think it's something that's evolved over time. So I think in the beginning, it was just a lot of trying to write things down and organize and at least just stay on top of what I was doing. At that time, I was hired as a recruiter, and so I was thrown into this sort of fire of visiting high schools and attending college fairs and doing undergraduate recruitment for Hope. As my responsibilities evolved and grew over time, it quickly became obvious to me that I needed to figure out a way to better organize so that I could deliver on the things that I promised. And so that's where I've gotten into more of like managing a task list, a to-do list, really being good with my calendar, trying to have really effective methods for managing my email, and just all of these things that people doing this kind of what I would call knowledge work, be it social media, marketing, doesn't matter. It's you have to have these kind of skills, I think, to really feel like you're making a difference in the work that you're doing. So I like to think that this is something where I'm just over time sanding off rough edges and trying new things and figuring out what works. And thankfully, here in 2020, there are, I think, more tools than ever for communicating, for managing your day-to-day work. And really, I think the ultimate goal is, for me anyway, is that at the end of the day, I want to feel like I accomplished something. I think that's what we all want to do. And I think that's possible for everybody every day. It's just a matter of kind of having the end in mind.
Yeah. And Brendan, I agree with what you said, Andrew, particularly in the fact that we are always kind of working. We're kind of figuring this out along the way and always growing. Brendan, for you, what was the experience like? You've been in a variety of industries. You've had a lot of different experiences. How has it changed for you, and what have you learned over the course of this time?
Oh, so much. Still learning too. Thanks to people like yourself and Andrew, definitely. No, so, when I left grad school and started in broadcast, it was, in many respects, it was both incredibly stressful and incredibly easy to kind of keep myself on track, because I was producing a daily or nightly newscast. So kind of the deadlines I would deal with on a project were all same day deadlines. So the news goes on at 11 o'clock at night, every night. We need to print the newscast at 10 o'clock at night, every night. We need to make sure our graphics are in by 8 o'clock at night, every night. And so it was rigid in that way. And that was a really helpful way to learn. The challenge in that is that while rigid, yes, it meant that if you missed any of those marks, you were in a lot of trouble. So, the news doesn't wait for, myself, the producer, to be ready. At 11 o'clock, it's going on one way or another. And so really within any one given day, you had to get highly efficient at how you were doing work. You had to have a goal in mind. You had to have a plan in mind. You had to know how to execute it as quickly as you possibly could, find efficiencies where you could, and also at the same time, be ready to throw everything out should there be breaking news. And so when I pivoted to higher education in 2014, one of the biggest transitions I had to make was this idea of my deadlines are no longer same day deadlines. I'm dealing with deadlines that could be a few days out, a few weeks out, a few months out. There are some projects that our organization works on that are, multi-year projects. And so how do you start to kind of funnel everything into a system that helps you stay on track? If you get off track very early in a process, that can really cause significant problems far down the road, everything downstream. And so what I essentially did is I started to transition and essentially kind of would work backwards. So I would set my own internal deadlines for any one project. I know this isn't foreign to a lot of people. And so I would say, okay, well, this needs to be done by June 1st. This needs to be done by May 1st, and just kind of work backwards as kind of to set a timetable for what I was doing. In terms of tools, I would work with not specific tools, but where I could, I would find shortcuts. Anything that would take me a lot of time, that was process-based, focused, I would try to find a way to shorten that process, and that would give me more time to work on the content.
That's great points. The thing that both of you work with overall is the idea of communications. And while the audiences may be different, whether it be who you used to communicate with versus who you communicate with now, you are communicators, you're marketers, right? So when you are thinking about communications, and you hit on this a little bit, Brendan, there are communications that you need to send the next day, but then you've got to plan something a month out. What is that planning process like for both of you is what I'm interested in. I will note on my end, I have to consider a lot of different things. There's a lot of different tools that we're doing, but it's really not as much about the tools in my case and how I process it. I'm trying to think about what is the message I'm trying to relay, and is this message that's something that could change? Andrew, let's go back to you and on this topic. how do you plan ahead while still trying to live in the moment? Because that's a lot to manage, I imagine, for a lot of people who maybe have never done this.
Yeah, I think, when you think about essentially the recruiting life cycle of a undergraduate student, or a prospective undergraduate student, can be 18, 24, 36 months. And so, yeah, we're working from a broad game plan sort of strategy of what does that journey look like. I think at Hope, we really come at that from a service oriented mindset, that we want to make sure that the touch points along the way, we're really serving the student and their family as they make a substantial financial decision. So I think we always have kind of that overarching goal. And the thing I always say about college admissions, I think is so great, is that we get to do it again next year. Like, we get a do-over every year. And so that's not something that every workplace is fortunate to have. We kind of have this cycle, and so we know what to expect. But then things like COVID happen in March 2020, and we have to pivot quickly and adjust a lot of messaging on the fly. And I think if you don't have a plan in place, that's really difficult. But the other aspect of that, I think, is that you have to have good team communication, and that's a drum that I beat all the time. Is people have to. I go back to something that my first boss said to me on my first day, which is, whenever you make a decision, there's 3 questions that you need to answer. Either you've accomplished something or you made a decision, and that's, who needs to know about this? Who needs to hear this? Who would benefit from knowing this? Like, there's the need to know, and then who would benefit from knowing this? And then lastly, who by knowing this would benefit us? And so I think that communication aspect is really important and can sort of be like a force multiplier for the work that you're doing. If the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really fall? Or did it make a sound? I think is the way it goes. But the metaphor is the same, especially when you're working remotely. I think people have to know what you're doing, and that will help them. And again, it's a multiplier. So I think communication is really important, whether you're looking at a long-term strategy or day-to-day. And I would argue that the way things are right now, you have to have that going all the time. You have to be communicating.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the reality of things too here, because we are talking now, in a time when there's a lot of new tools for people in terms of communicating, and there's a lot of new tools that some people, quite frankly, are uncomfortable with. I would argue that many are probably thrilled at these new tools coming into play. I myself, as an example, talk about Microsoft Teams coming into my job, and it's been a lifesaver, in my opinion. For you, though, you're talking obviously about the communication part. I'm wondering, Brendan, do you feel the same about communication? And is that part of the workflow, really having effective communication?
Yeah, it really is. And so I'll say also, I don't want to repeat everything that Andrew said, so I'll just ditto, and then I'll build on top of it a little bit, which is the communication is clear, but also the plan. Yes, you can have a plan for marketing. In my case, it's for students or alumni, whatever, depending the event is. But also kind of having a plan in place for if a situation starts to go sideways, who has the making power, who has the ability to kind of sign off on some of the things you need to do in order to respond quickly and effectively. And I love those 3 questions that Andrew shared in terms of when you're thinking about a piece of content. I heard not quite phrased that way. I work on something very similar, but I would also kind of add a 4th in there, which is for any specific audience that you're reaching out to, that a piece of content is intended for. I also always ask myself, what do we think they are feeling at that moment? And I think if you have a really clear idea of what your organization stands for, and kind of I like to say, if our organization was a person, what type of person would it be? If you know that, and you're able to answer the question of what are people feeling as they come to you looking for this piece of content, you can really start to create communications, 1, that really meet their needs, but 2, internally, everybody is on the same page about. So acknowledge, college admissions processes can be super stressful. Anybody who's gone through this knows that. So if somebody is landing on a financial aid page, or if they're landing on a scholarship or application page, generally it's because they're looking for a piece of information that could have a significant impact on their life. And I think it is our job as communicators to recognize that in the moment and create content that is aware of kind of the needs of our audience in that way.
Yeah, and I will say, in my work, previously in higher ed, for those who don't know, but in my work outside of higher ed and in a variety of industries now, it's very fascinating because everyone communicates in a different way. We know this is an obvious statement. But when it comes down to it, different industries are on different places. So when we're talking about where are we communicating, for example, on social media, certainly students, TikTok, or previously Snapchat, these places were places the students were. Now, this is not to say we should be there or shouldn't be there in certain ways, but that's where they were. When you go into a world like where I'm in, guess what? LinkedIn, huge. It's gigantic. It's a very important network. So this is something that has to be considered, not just what we are saying, where we are saying it. So when you think about communicating and staying on the cusp of all the information you need to know, and then making those changes, what about the fact that we do have to think about these different networks? And this, in this case, Andrew, I would go as far as saying we're talking about email. I mean, we're talking about how we're communicating by email. How are they interconnected? So where do you go to kind of track your progress if you don't have a tool? Because some people don't have a tool. How do you flex in that moment? And what are you guys doing to organize in that way? I mean, really, either one of you can speak to this because you both do content in a different way. I'm happy to say, to make it easy too. Start with Andrew.
Okay. Yeah, I think, our approach to content is to kind of have kind of an overarching idea of where we're going with communicating with our prospective students. But I think what makes kind of what we do really fun is the spontaneous stuff and paying attention to what's happening on campus and communicating those things, with some agility week to week. I would say my job involves a little bit less on the social side and a little bit more on email marketing side. So I'm trying to say, okay, every time we email a student, we better have a darn good reason for that. And so that's really what's going through my mind. And email is not the solution to all of our problems, like a lot of people seem to think. We have to treat that like currency when it comes to communicating with prospective students. So I'm fortunate to have people around me that know a lot more than me about a lot of different things and complement my knowledge that well. And so I'm not the biggest. I installed TikTok before I was concerned Trump was going to ban it. That didn't happen, but I opened it and created an account, and I was terrified. So if somebody wants to teach me TikTok, that'd be great. But I don't have to know it all because I am surrounded by people who are really knowledgeable, and I just have to do what I can do well. And I think so often people in the communication space are. You feel like you have to know everything about everything, and we just don't. You can't. And I'll tell you, focus is rocket fuel for your career in literally all facets. And so that would be my biggest encouragement. The world has never moved more quickly. And so TikTok might be around for a while, but it's not going to be here forever. And so you're better served understanding how you can focus and do less but better, is what I would say.
I love what you just said, that focus is rocket fuel. You've given some good quotables tonight that I'm gonna have to jot down next time, and I'm sure I've heard them from you before. On that same topic, Brendan, how do you feel? And really, I before you say anything, I do want to echo that. I think one thing that fascinates me about this is really at the heart of this really is flexibility and communication. And everything we're talking about, we need to be flexible and we need to be able to communicate well. This seems to be all at the heart of being efficient at our jobs and being able to actually manage our day to day.
It is. And I've found as I've progressed in my career, earlier Andrew talked about how when he first graduated and began his career, that there were lots of things he didn't know. And so some of this has gotten easier to navigate as I've gotten older, just because you start to learn things and you say, oh, wait a minute, I can't be as flexible if I don't actually know the particulars of a certain project. And so before I even sit down to start a piece of work, let me just try to get the big picture and the context. And that way, if we need to change midstream, I'll have a greater grasp on where everything is coming from. I want to, Andrew, I think you said something that is so important and just makes my heart big and warm and squishy, where it's that idea of we don't need to know everything. So I started to see this before I left news, where reporters were being asked to, tape their stories. They were the videographer, they were the editor, they were the writer, they were doing it start to finish. And I saw what type of pressure that would put on young journalists. I think on the marketing side, I think we see a lot of that. We see job descriptions or have colleagues who, I'll speak for myself, I am part graphic designer, part social media strategist, part content strategist, copywriter. I also do photography, videography, editing. I do so much. And so, there are times where I look at what some of my colleagues are doing in the field. Chris, you spent a lot of time in the social media space, and we have friends and colleagues who social is the majority of their job. What they know dwarfs my knowledge of the same slice of that industry. And that can be intimidating sometimes. But that idea of we don't need to know everything because we have all these resources out there is really, remember, just start to develop an appreciation for what you are good at and really lean into and start to develop that. And I think that will really help your career.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. One thing that you've both just hit on is the idea that we don't need to know everything. And I think you've nailed the reasons why we don't need to know everything. Why do you think, or I should say, do you think, however, it's important to have an understanding of what people do, not necessarily have their knowledge, but it's important to understand what they actually do in their day to day so that you can be more effective in working with them? It sounds like, Brendan, you think so. So I'm going to bring you up to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And so, I think it's important to know that because it's important to know what everybody's reality is. And so I'm a big believer, if you haven't picked up on it so far, and just kind of empathy first. And so if you can know what somebody else's reality is, it goes a long way toward you being able to work better with that person. And that is good for you, it is good for them, and it is good for your organization. And so when I'm working with a web developer, and we need to make a change to the website, what feels like a simple change to me, like, hey, we need to change these 4 pictures and do X, that may not be an easy thing. That may take 8 to 12 hours of development work. And so if I go into that situation and say, hey, we just need to do this easy thing and yada, 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 that's dismissive, and that's not valuing the time, effort, and expertise that somebody may have to put into something. So I think a much better question is, hey, I'm thinking of doing something like this. What does that look like for you? Or what do you need from me? Because since I can't know everything, I'm relying on these other people to help me out. And that's only going to work for us if I'm in a position to help them when I can. And hopefully that down the road, they'll be able to help me when they can. But just make assumptions about what other around you are doing, whether their job is easy or difficult. I think you'll get yourself into trouble real fast.
100%. Andrew, what do you think on that one? I get the sense that you've got a few thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think for me, it boils down to an element of humility. It's like, I think about the best leaders that I've worked with. They're always really good listeners, and they always ask really good questions. And they make it so you feel like they really care about the knowledge that you have. And that's something that I definitely want to emulate, because I think as a young professional, it makes a big difference when there are people believing in you. So you might be starting out, you might be in a position now where you're leading others. And I would just say, if you're starting out, that's something to work toward. Those are habits that you can own those as a young professional. And if you are in a leadership role, I just think for the younger people in your organization, the more that you listen and value the perspective that they have, that just goes a long, long way in terms of building trust. And I think without good communication and trust, it's hard to get good work done. At least not efficiently. I mean, you can sort of brute force your way into success, and there are all kinds of examples of that. But I think the ones that really stick out to me are examples where it's clear that a company like Brendan said has empathy for its people, and that plays out in terms of their results. And so I do believe that's a good path towards success. And there's other ways to do it, but that's the way that I would want to do it.
Yeah, and I'm going to go as far as saying, first and foremost, a friendly reminder: if anyone is dropping in and out and has a question, feel free to ask. I'm going to go now and say that I think tools are definitely a big part of it. The tools that we use can help organize our life and organize our work, or sometimes both. That is the reality. I have side projects. Teaching is not a side project, but it's not my full-time work, and I need to organize my time to do it effectively. I have things I do with my community. I actually had the opportunity to market and help promote and push for full-day kindergarten in my town, which we did not have. So I couldn't do this without tools. Let's hit on tools. You both love tools. I could really go with either direction. So I'm going to go to Brendan first on this one. Brendan, talk tools and how tools first, if you could both talk a little bit about how tools have helped you and what tools those may be, with maybe an example or two of how you've used them.
Yeah, sure. So, boy, I'll try not to get too long-winded on this. I also, Chris, thank you for letting, because after this, I can just listen to what Andrew says and take notes about everything he's using, which I've done several times when I've seen him present. I think for me, in terms of tools, I mentioned earlier about using tools to make processes efficient, so you can kind of clear your head and think about the content. And so for me, it's normally about just trying to kind of save time, cut down on searching for things or trying to remember things. And so a lot of this for me was, I would certainly tinker when I was in news. I would tinker with different kind of settings within any given kind of program we were using to create newscasts to save time. But this really exploded for me once I got into higher ed. And I just huge impact.
There we go. You're back. Sorry, we've lost you there for just a minute.
Sorry about that.
So.
One of the things I was saying was, one of the tools that has really been a lifesaver for me has specifically been Todoist. So Todoist is a to-do platform. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a kind of a super nerd when it comes with Todoist. But it's just a wonderful way to get any random thought of, I need to remember to send this email to Andrew. I need to remember to ask, so-and-so about the graphic design project. It is just a really high-speed way to get it out of my brain. And so then I don't have to worry about remembering it. I know I've captured that information somewhere else. There's a great book called Getting Things Done from David Allen, and he talks about kind of capturing information and storing it in a place where it will be later. And so you don't have to do all the mental energy of working on it. But one tool that I've also fallen in love with just recently, so as someone who constantly tinkers and explores, there's an app. I know it's a Mac app. I don't know if it's on other platforms, but it's called Paste, and it's a copy paste kind of platform manager, which sounds like the geekiest thing on the planet. But I think we've all had experiences where we copy something, we want to paste it into a document, we get distracted, we copy something else, and then we go to paste something in a document and it's not what we thought we had. And we thought, oh, shoot, what the heck was that? Paste just keeps a running record of all the things that you have copied. You can set it to be a day, 3 days, a month, whatever. Of a record of what I've copied has been a lifesaver a handful of times. And it's been a real time saver. If somebody says, hey, I need a link, and I know I copied the link an hour and a half ago, it's a lot easier to go into Paste and grab it from there using a few keyboard shortcuts than it is to go back, open Chrome, find the page, copy the URL, paste it into Slack.
Can I quickly say, you just said a very important word, keyboard shortcuts. I just want to say, learn them. Before I go to Andrew, I had to just get out and say, they're really awesome. Pick them up. And you are going to say, I'd argue you could save 10, 15 minutes a day if you actually really pick up those.
Within the Adobe Creative Suite, if you're not using keyboard shortcuts, you will drive yourself mad in about 15 minutes. So Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere, Illustrator, keyboard shortcuts are your best friends because the programs themselves certainly are not.
Yeah. So Andrew, let's hear from you. I know you got some tools. I know you've got some game-changing experiences in your profession with tools. So what comes to mind for you?
I was glad to hear Brendan mention Paste. I love that app. I don't know the first time I ever thought about using a clipboard history manager. I've gotten a few coworkers using it. Brendan's right, it's super geeky, but it's life-changing. Literally, if you're at a computer all day and you ever need to copy and paste, like, my goodness, please, there's all kinds of them out there. Please use something like that. I'm definitely of the belief that there are some key utilities like that if almost anybody can embrace and really find value out of. And a clipboard history tool is one. Text expansion tool like Text Expander, which kind of lets you take little snippets of text and associate them with abbreviations. So you type it in and it pops up whatever you want. Man, there's all kinds of things. But just in terms of my day-to-day, that's, because I am kind of geeky when it comes to this stuff. I'm always trying to think of how can I get the most out of the 8 hours that I'm sitting down here in my basement right now, working? And meetings take up time. So really the time that I'm not in meetings is really valuable because that's when I have time to actually to check things off my list. I hardly can do that during a meeting. So I was kind of thinking through my day, what is it like? And about a year ago, I started using a full focus planner. This is by Michael Hyatt. It's kind of a whole system. It's kind of in the vein of what used to be the old day runner planners, that kind of thing, but it's its own thing. And the thing that I like about it is for each day, you can't really see it on the video, but there's what's called the daily big three. So every morning I sit down, I keep a digital task manager as well. I use Things, and I'm a firm believer that everyone needs a to-do list. So I don't care where you put it on paper, put it on a whiteboard, put it on, that's probably not a good idea. Put it on Todoist, put it, whatever. So I'll consult my digital to-do list and I'll pick what are the 3 things? Because if you're like me, you've got 25 things on your to-do list that all feel important, all feel urgent, to borrow the Stephen Covey parlance there. But I can't do 25 things in a day. And if you leave them all there, I guarantee by 5 o'clock, you are going to be so disappointed at the results of your day because it doesn't matter how much you actually accomplished. It feels like you did nothing. However, the trick there is if you pick a big 3, these are the things that at 4:55, I want to see these things done in my work day. If you're fortunate to be able to finish at 4:55, that has been game changing for me. I don't know how I did work before it, but now most days, end of the day, I get to the end and I go, this is great. I may not have gotten everything done, but I've done those 3 things, hopefully. And that's huge. The other piece of that I really feel is important is there's a kind of an other tasks section here. This is a concept I've talked about a lot. So for those that have heard me, I'm sorry, but hopefully this is a new audience. But I really think it's important to manage your email in batches. It is such a temptation to have your email open all day. And if I'm being honest, I'm not very good at this, but I am good at setting aside time to actually go through and process. I get probably 50 emails a day, which I know is not a lot. It used to be more, but I can easily get through those in an hour if I set aside kind of 2 sessions to go through them. So that's kind of the main advice is batch process your email. Don't try to manage it all day. And also don't look at it first thing in the morning unless you absolutely have to. Most people don't. They think they do, but they don't. So yeah, those are some of the tools that I use.
No, fantastic. I appreciate it. And I like that you mentioned something that we can physically hold that's not a digital tool, because I do think these still are immensely valuable. I have them for any one of my major side projects in life, in particular, a program I run at my local library. Well, I did prior to COVID, and waiting for it to come back. Hopefully get to back in there. And that project, though, it started out of a notebook. That's where it began. The idea is everything written down, and I planned. But this is a very unique notebook, so I'm really interested in that. I got to take a look at that. We've been chatting for a while. We're coming to the 36-minute mark. I got to ask, because again, this is at its core going to be designed for undergraduate classes and potentially some graduate and graduate classes, I should say, to see. And I'd love to hear what you would recommend to young social media professionals, or anyone really. Actually, it doesn't have to be young, because we come into the field in all shapes, sizes, and ages. And I think it's great to give advice. And you've both been in marketing. As you speak to future marketers or people who are joining marketers as maybe a new second career, whatever it might be, what advice do you give to them from the perspective of organization? If you had to say, this is the one thing I have to let you know. And I will let you start on this one. You know what? We'll put Brendan in the hot seat first, because Andrew just dropped some great knowledge on us a moment ago.
Yeah, Chris, that's a really wonderful question. And, especially as someone who kind of feels doing content work in a new way, when I transitioned from journalism into communications and marketing, and social was part of my life in a new way. I think there are two big things that I, would share with a professional or soon to be professional that really kind of helped me through. And so one is, find one or two good sources of current information and emerging trends just to read. There are so many great blogs and websites and resources out there that it's easy to be overwhelmed by everything. And so I just really settled on a couple. So there's the social media scheduling tool Buffer. They have a really solid blog. And at the time I went with Buffer, and HubSpot. A lot of their marketing and communications research and articles is all good. And so those were kind of two places that I said, you know what, these are the places I'm going to try to read a lot of information and kind of see what emerging trends are, and just continue to learn about my field. And that will help me think of new ideas. And it also, in terms of staying organized, helped me think that, okay, if I want to try something new, it helps identify when you know what those emerging trends are. It helps identify, okay, so what are the things we can kind of stop doing or do less of, and what are the things we can try more of? When I have a teammate now who is incredible. She started with our organization in the spring, and she's one of the most talented people I've worked with. But before that, I spent, most 4.5 of my 5.5 current organization is a team of one, which it's really easy to fall into the temptation to say, I want to try this new thing. I want to try this new thing without letting go of any of the old things. And before you know it, you find yourself overwhelmed, feeling burnt out. You can't keep up. And so staying organized in terms of trying to implement some of these ideas that you have, part of that means knowing why you want to try a specific thing, and knowing why you should stop doing one of the other things to make room for it. And if you can justify those things to a manager, to your teammates, it really helps you, as opposed to saying, everybody else is doing this thing, I think we should do it. That's not really a reason. know why it will, getting back to what Andrew said, why is it going to benefit your audience, and why is it going to benefit your organization? If you know those things, that will really help you stay organized on a big picture point of view.
Now, Andrew, same question.
Yeah, I would add to that. Yeah, just totally agree with Brendan there. I think for me, I wish something that I had focused on earlier in my career was just reading in general. I think, and not just content related to my work, but just reading in general, fiction and other business topics or other nonfiction topics that interest me. I find that I'm able to make connections when I look beyond kind of the scope or kind of the little bubble that I'm in here in higher education recruitment. And I feel like some of my best ideas have come where I've seen something happening in a different industry and made a connection to how that could play into what we're doing at Hope. And that's where you produce, I think, original ideas. There's an author, Austin Kleon, who says, steal like an artist. And that's the thing, is like, if you're paying attention and you're reading, you're going to get good ideas, and you're going to be able to remix them in a way that really benefits your current organization. So my advice to young professionals would also be read a lot, and read outside of your normal sphere of interests and your normal professional interests.
Yeah. I'm going to first and foremost take this time to say, if anyone is, I know people have been popping in and out throughout this, but if anyone has questions, you can feel free to drop them. That said, I want to take first a moment to say thanks to both of you for joining, and to add just my small bit of insights. I want to kind of go on top of something you said, Andrew, which is going outside your industry. I would not have been able to go into a new industry and feel even semi-comfortable if I had not done that my entire career. And so this is a message that I'm sure is going to be very much received by those in higher ed, but I think it just goes across the board, because I don't think it's easy to go into, say, higher ed or any industry with no understanding or no knowledge whatsoever. So be willing to learn is my really great advice that I would give. I would just say, I'm not defining it as great. That's the great advice I was actually given, was to always be willing to learn. My grandfather and my father both instilled this idea, and I take that with me today, and I'm going to teach it to my son and to my daughter. And the second piece I would add is to have an outside hobby. And it sounds maybe like, well, why would I add work? But you have solace in something. You ask me what my outside hobby is, most people can tell you what the things I like. I have a brand that I'm fair to say is quite defined now, but it wasn't always there. And I had to find it myself. So those are things that I would add. At this point, though, I do want to say thank you to both of you for taking time to join me tonight. This was a really productive conversation. No pun intended. And I really appreciate you taking that time. So thanks again to Brendan Foley and Andrew Myers. You can connect with them on Twitter, and you guys are all over the place. I know you're on LinkedIn, all over places, and I recommend people talk to both of them. They are both generally good people, and both very smart people. We'll be having future ones of these for those who are watching this live. If you are in one of my courses, this is not likely the last one you'll watch, and it may not be the first one you'll watch, but these are going to be important, and they're definitely something that I hope gives you a little bit of outside perspective as you take this course. With all that said, I do want to say thank you to everyone who has tuned in, and to my class, thank you for watching, and I hope you've taken away some good knowledge. I certainly have heard great stuff from these guys, so I'm pretty sure you did. And thanks everybody for joining.